Well, let's look in Deuteronomy chapter 10 and verse 3 we're looking at. In your book, it's page 72, if you have the syllabus. So, verse 3, Moses is talking about the second time that he went up on the mountain, and he said, I made an ark of acacia wood and hewed 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and went up into the mount, having the 2 tables in mine hand. So we're going to read from First Spirit of Prophecy, page 272. God gave a pattern of the ark to Moses with special directions how to make it. You know, one thing that's really strange to me is that when it comes to the day of worship, people think it's not important to be exactly what it says. That's kind of the attitude almost that any day is okay, as long as you keep 1 and 7. Well, it wasn't true of Adam and Eve. The fact that they didn't follow God's directions exactly led them to lose the Garden of Eden and lose their purity. And then we have Moses, one of the great leaders of the Bible, and he doesn't think it's okay to do different than what God says. And so he follows the instructions that were given him to the letter. It says, the ark was made to contain the tables of stone on which God engraved with his own finger the 10 Commandments. So this was the primary purpose of the ark, to have the 10 Commandments in it, to be a place where they would be stored.
Not only that, but like we mentioned earlier, some individuals believe that any day, as long as you keep the day.
Yeah.
But God was particular to write it twice with his finger.
Yes.
And he gave dimensions as to build this box to put it in. He gave everything exactly. So he is pretty particular.
Absolutely. God has a reason for everything he says. And there are tremendous spiritual reasons or lessons from the sanctuary about the life of Christ, and if Moses hadn't followed it exactly, it would have messed up the prophecy, actually, of what Jesus would do. It was in form like a chest, and was overlaid and inlaid with pure gold. So it wasn't just covered with gold on the outside, it was covered on the inside too. Yes.
Also, what came to my mind is when the children of Israel left Egypt and they wanted something to eat, and God gave manna. If it was any day other than could be the Sabbath, then they could follow every day and they could choose which day they wanted to worship.
That's right. That's right. It was ornamented with crowns of gold round about the top. The cover of this sacred chest was the mercy seat, made of solid gold. Now in the sanctuary, it seems like when something is made out of solid gold, it represents divinity. When something is made out of wood covered with gold, or covered with brass out on the courtyard, it represents what God can do with humanity. How he can cover us, in this case, both inside and out, with gold. On each end of the mercy seat was fixed a cherub of pure, solid gold. Their faces were turned toward each other, and were looking reverentially downward toward the mercy seat, which represents all the heavenly angels looking with interest and reverence, notice what it says next, to the law of God deposited in the ark in the heavenly sanctuary. So they were looking downward at the mercy seat, but actually they were looking at the law. The law is basically the foundation of God's government. That's how his government operates. Every country has laws. And if they change those laws, they change their country. You don't have the same country anymore. And so God is not able to change his law. These cherubs had wings. One wing of each angel was stretched forth on high, while the other wing of each angel covered their forms. So they showed complete reverence two ways. They showed reverence by covering themselves in the presence of God's law and his throne. And they also covered this very sacred spot with their wings. The ark of the earthly sanctuary was the pattern of the true ark in heaven. Some people are losing their realization that there is an ark in heaven. There is a sanctuary in heaven. And some are losing the idea that there's two apartments in the heavenly sanctuary. Welcome. But, you know, there's plenty of evidence, both in the Bible and in Ellen White's writings, that what Moses made was an exact replica of what was up there. And God told him, you better do it exactly like I tell you. And so that way we know what's up there. There, beside the heavenly ark, stand living angels at either end of the ark, each with one wing overshadowing the mercy seat and stretching forth on high, while the other wings are folded over their forms in token of reverence and humility. So, the angels in heaven are the ones that Moses made these on the ark after. And they're still there, doing the same thing. The earthly sanctuary was done away with, but they're still there doing this. Now, it adds a word here, and I think it's very, very important. The angels demonstrated reverence. This is one of the characteristics of anyone who understands the holiness of God, the holiness of his law, anything that has to do with God. Their natural reaction is reverence. The lack of reverence shows there's something missing. And connected with that is humility. You know, how dare a man change the day of worship? Where's the humility? It's gone. And there's many ways in which people demonstrate a lack of humility. But the angels of heaven, they are demonstrating that, especially as they are connected to God's law and to God's throne.
And I was thinking that we lack reverence in the house of God on His holy day.
Yeah.
More than anything else.
You're right.
If we can bring that reverence in, then we can bring the Holy Spirit in also.
Yeah.
But we lack reverence a lot.
We don't sense that God is there. You know, in the Bible, when some of the characters came close to God, they got very subdued and scared, some of them, wondering, am I going to die? But it's like the church is just another building and there's nothing special about it. And so people come in, they act in the church as though God were not there. This is one of the marks of Laodicea, I believe, evidence that we are. But God is trying to restore our sense of reverence, and that brings with it humility in God's presence. In the earthly ark, Moses was required to place the tables of stone. These were called the tables of the testimony. It's interesting. So this is the testimony of Jesus, testimony of God. 10 Commandments are his testimony. And the ark was called the Ark of the Testimony. So they called it that, not always probably, but that was one of the names that was used, the Ark of the Testimony. Why? Because the most important thing was those 10 Commandments. Because they contained God's testimony in the 10 Commandments. Now here again, I always like to stress the importance. The commandments were not intended to be a list of don'ts. They were intended to be a list of promises. So the 10 Commandments are God's testimony about what he can do in our lives, how he can change us. I've just started a series at my church on the 10 Commandments, and last Sabbath we covered the first 2 commandments. It's uploaded if you want to look at it on my YouTube channel. But I am convinced that we have just a hazy idea of those commandments. And because of that, we could think that we're commandment keepers when we're not. In fact, it's pretty hard to study them carefully and come out of it saying, yes, I'm a commandment keeper. But we come out saying, Lord, thank you for your righteousness that you gave me when I yielded my heart to you. And please fulfill all of this in me. You promised that you would do it. That, I believe, is the proper reaction. All right, going back to our chapter, verse 4 and 5, chapter 10 in Deuteronomy. And he wrote on the tables according to the first writing, the 10 Commandments. So we don't have to have any worry that there's a difference between the first set and the second set and what he spoke from the mountain. It was all the same. Which the Lord spake unto you in the mount, out of the midst of the fire in the day of the assembly. And the Lord gave them unto me. So here we have proof. There's been no editing, no changing. Everything is the way God spoke it and the way he wrote it with his finger. And I turned myself and came down from the mount and put the tables in the ark which I had made. And there they be, as the Lord commanded me. So Moses followed always exactly what God said. He didn't come back to the sanctuary and say, you know, it's going to be a lot of work to get that lid off and get those commandments out. So we're going to put them somewhere else. We'll put them in the most holy place. We'll just lean it up against the ark. No. God told him, put it inside the ark. He brought it down the mountain. He put it inside the ark. 3 Testimonies 3:54. These men, that's Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, saw Moses come down from the mount after he had received the second tables of stone, and while his face was so resplendent with the glory of God, that the people would not approach him, but fled from him. Now, you know what these men did in rebelling against Moses. How they could do that and yet have been an eyewitness of what happened to Moses. They didn't see each other ever shining like that, or anybody else, only Moses. And yet they had the nerve to claim they could do better than Moses. He called to them, but they seemed terrified. He presented the tables of stone and said, I pleaded in your behalf and have turned the wrath of God from you. I urge that if God must forsake and destroy his congregation, my name might also be blotted from his book. Lo, he has answered me, and these tables of stone that I hold in my hand are the pledge given me of his reconciliation with his people. Now this is very interesting. When Moses threw down the first tables of stone and smashed them, it was evidence that the covenant had been broken with Israel. Now, as he brings down the second set of 10 commandments, he says, God has accepted you again. Now, I think both times they made a mistake because they still seemed to trust in themselves that they could keep God's law. But that really wasn't what God had in mind. And he's not trying to say we can keep it in our own strength ever. But that this is what he can do through us if we cooperate with him. So somehow, I guess, some of the people anyway got the picture of, well, we were cast off for a while, but he's accepted us again. Patriarchs and Prophets 3:30. While Moses was in the mount, God presented to him not only the tables of the law, but also the plan of salvation. So God explained, Jesus himself explained the plan of salvation. So Moses understood the meaning of the articles of furniture and all of that sanctuary service. He understood that because God explained it all to him. He saw that the sacrifice of Christ was prefigured by all the types and symbols of the Jewish age. And it was the heavenly light streaming from Calvary, no less than the glory of the law of God, that shed such a radiance upon the face of Moses. I thought that was very interesting. That the shining of his face had two causes. Well, maybe three. Just the fact that he was in God's presence certainly was one of them. But here it identifies two of them. The value of the law, the holiness of the law, caused his face to shine. And the incredible sacrifice of Christ, that he would be willing to come and die to save men that had no other way of salvation. For Jesus to do that is such a holy thing and such an amazing thing that those two things made Moses' face shine as he learned about these. And it lasted until he came down the mountain for a while. Okay, verse 6. And the children of Israel took their journey from Beeroth of the children of Jachin to Mosera. There Aaron died, and there he was buried. And Eleazar his son ministered in the priest's office in his stead. So now we have a change in the text, and we're through with the recap of Mount Sinai, And now he's progressing to the final scenes before Moses passes away. First, Aaron is the one to die. And his son, Eleazar, is installed in his place. In Patriarchs and Prophets 4:26, it says, with deep sorrow, Moses removed from Aaron the holy vestments and placed them upon Eleazar, who thus became his successor by divine appointment. So Moses didn't just decide, well, I think Eleazar will be the best one to take over. Or they didn't have a committee to decide who would be the best one to take over. God said Eleazar is the one. Now, I do believe God uses committees, but committees aren't worth much if the people are not praying for God's will. If they're not saying, Lord, please help us, who should we pick for this post of duty? And not just praying, without really meaning it, but feeling their need of guidance. Then I believe the Lord does reveal to his people who should fill the different posts of duty. So here we see that Moses wasn't glad to get rid of Aaron. Aaron had made a terrible mistake. And that mistake shows what kind of character he tended to have. But Moses really appreciated all of his work through the years, and so it's really sad for him to be ready to pass away. For his sin at Kadesh, Aaron was denied the privilege of officiating as God's high priest in Canaan, of offering the first sacrifice in the goodly land, and thus consecrating the inheritance of Israel. No doubt that was a deep desire on Aaron's part to be able to get in Canaan. They'd had to take a 40-year detour, which delayed their going in. And now he realizes that he's not going to be able to do that. And he was submissive to God's will. We don't see any any record of him grumbling about his fate. He accepted, that's an evidence of a person's true sorrow for their sin if they are not fighting with the outcome, complaining about the outcome. And sometimes there's some very serious consequences to our sin, and doesn't mean he didn't forgive us, but there are some consequences. And if we are truly sorry, we don't complain about those consequences. Then it says, the painful duty was laid upon Moses to remove from, let's see, I think I dropped down. Yeah, okay, 3 Testimonies 293. Upon Mount Hor, Aaron died and was buried. Moses, Aaron's brother, and Eleazar, his son, accompanied him to the mount. The painful duty was laid upon Moses to remove from his brother Aaron the sacerdotal robes and place them upon Eleazar. For God had said that he should succeed Aaron in the priesthood. Moses and Eleazar witnessed the death of Aaron, and Moses buried him in the mount. Now we're told that when Moses died, his eyes were still good, his natural force hadn't abated. He still could have gone for more years, but God allowed him to die. I assume the same is true of Aaron because he was only think 3 years different from Moses. But he was not allowed to live out his full life because of the sin that he had done. First volume of Spirit of Prophecy 3:13. Aaron died at Mount Hor, for the Lord had said that he should not enter the promised land, because with Moses he had sinned at the time of bringing water from the rock at Meribah. Moses and the sons of Aaron buried him in the mount, that the people might not be tempted to make too great ceremony over his body and be guilty of the sin of idolatry. This is very interesting. You know, we make a big deal about somebody's burial, and we mark the spot, you know, for sure, of where they are. But here we have Aaron, and the same was true of Moses. Here we have Aaron, who had been faithful in serving God most of his life. He had been faithful, and he was one of the great leaders in the Bible. And yet, nobody knew where he was buried. And those that complained about him while he was alive and didn't like what he did, they would have gone there and they would have paid a lot of respects to them, and probably built a shrine or something there where he was buried to bring honor and so on. And God said, no, that's not best. It's better that we do what Aaron said, rather than glorify his tomb or whatever. And when I think of this, I have to think of the homes and the places where Ellen White lived that, you know, are being fixed up and made a place where people can go. And there's a lot of honor given to the places where she lived and where she was, her birthplace, and, you know, all these places. And yet, in general, we don't do what God revealed to her to tell us. We don't do it. The honor to Ellen White would be to do what is in the books. That's the honor, not to go and visit the place where she was. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong to look at those places, but, you know, we better look at what's in our heart, because why are we doing it? Are we thinking that brings honor to her? No. Doing what was said is what brings the honor. Patriarchs and Prophets 4:27. Concerning the burial of Israel's high priest, the scriptures give only the simple record. There Aaron died, and there he was buried. Would you like your tombstone to say that? You know, a lot of things get put on the tombstones. But as far as Aaron is concerned, just this one little line. There Aaron died, and there he was buried. In what striking contrast to the customs of the present day was this burial, conducted according to the express command of God. If somebody decided that for their funeral they were going to do the same, if they were fairly well known, a lot of people would feel cheated. They would feel, well, that's terrible that we can't go to the funeral. But, you know, that's the record we have here. In modern times, the funeral services of a man of high position are often made the occasion of ostentatious and extravagant display. When Aaron died, one of the most illustrious men that ever lived, there were only 2 of his nearest friends to witness his death and to attend his burial. And that lonely grave upon Mount Hor was forever hidden from the sight of Israel. You know, when I was reading those sentences, I thought of our Sabbath school lesson for Sabbath. Because one of the issues in the Sabbath school lesson is the fact that are we, as Adventists, following the customs of the world? And in what areas do we follow the customs of the world? This is certainly one of them. There's 2 of them, actually. Now, I like to speak at funerals and weddings, but the only reason is there's a big audience. I'm not that excited about marriages. 25 years, yeah, I get excited when somebody's been together 25 years. I'm not really big on funerals either, but so many people turn out. It's a place to talk to them about some important matters. So in that sense, it has some value. God is not honored in the great display so often made over the dead, and the extravagant expense incurred in returning their bodies to the dust. You know, I think funeral homes are going to have to pay a real price for what they charge to get people buried, and they really make the money in those places. But at Wildwood, we've found a way to get around that. We dig a grave up behind the church. We build a pine box for, nowadays it costs about $100. And we put them in the pine box and put them in the hole and cover it over. And the only cost is the backhoe cost of digging the hole and the cost of making that coffin. Now, I know that probably not everybody can do that, but I'm really thankful for a place where we don't have to spend all that money. But some people probably think, well, that's terrible. You should be spending a lot more money on their burial. The forms of Moses and Eleazar were at last discerned, slowly descending the mountainside, but Aaron was not with them. And you know, the people, I'm sure, got the message. The reason that Aaron messed up is because of us. Because we were always complaining. We were always griping. And so he lost it. And along with Moses, struck that rock, or at least gave the same speech. Upon Eleazar were the sacerdotal garments, showing that he had succeeded his father in the sacred office. As the people with heavy hearts gathered about their leader, Moses told them that Aaron had died in his arms upon Mount Hor, and that they there buried him. The congregation broke forth in mourning and lamentation, for they all loved Aaron, though they had so often caused him sorrow. They mourned for Aaron 30 days, even all the house of Israel. So this was a real disaster to them, to lose Aaron and to know the reason why. But God did it in a very unique form. You know, someone said this once, and I haven't studied enough on it to prove it to be true, But when something appears the first time, this is giving us a very important message. And so I would say that this was giving us a message about funerals. And it's important for us to depart from the customs and practices of the world as Christians. You know, for a Christian especially to die, I was thinking about this recently, for a Christian to die is not a sad thing. Of course, those that were close to them are going to miss them, and they're going to feel sad. That's true. Can't help that. You know, our affections get tied together with people, and so we're going to hurt when they're gone. But on the other hand, they crossed the victory line. They are safe now. There's no way they can mess up and miss heaven anymore. It's a victory. And why isn't there more of that in funerals? You know, I was thinking maybe the next time I have a funeral, I will talk about the difference between the death of a Christian and the death of someone that's just chasing the world. There's a huge difference there. I mean, you can see why. People of the world get all worked up, and they just get to where they can't control themselves and crying. It's because it's the end. There's nothing more. It's the end. And it's very, very sad, but for the Christian, it's not that way. Signs of the Times of October 14, 1880. The watching, waiting people at last see Moses and Eleazar slowly returning. But Aaron is not with them. Upon Eleazar are the sacerdotal garments, showing that he succeeds his father in the sacred office. Now it adds a little bit here. With quivering lips and sorrowful mien, Moses tells them that Aaron died in his arms upon Mount Hor, and they there buried him. So it's okay to mourn the loss of those we love. And Moses couldn't even tell the Israelites without his voice quivering because of the closeness that he had with Aaron. The congregation break forth into expressions of genuine grief, for they all loved Aaron, although they had so often caused him sorrow. As a token of respect for his memory, 30 days were spent in services of mourning for their lost leader. All right, so we move on to the next verse. Verse 7. From thence they journeyed unto Gadoah, and from Gadoah to Jotbath, a land of rivers of waters. So they didn't need any, water coming from the rock anymore. There was plenty of water there. Verse 8. At that time, the Lord separated the tribe of Levi to bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, to stand before the Lord, to minister unto him, and to bless in his name unto this day. So the tribe of Levi was given a very special responsibility. And in the book Education, page 148, it says, of the sons of Jacob, Levi was one of the most cruel and vindictive, one of the two most guilty in the treacherous murder of the Shechemites, if you remember that story. Levi's characteristics reflected in his descendants incurred for them the decree from God, I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. That was the first prediction on the tribe of Levi. It's found in Genesis 49:7. But repentance wrought reformation, and by their faithfulness to God, amidst the apostasy of the other tribes, the curse was transformed into a token of highest honor. So isn't that amazing? When God pronounces a curse, just like with Nineveh, when it was said that in 40 days they were going to be wiped out, and they repented, they didn't get wiped out. And when Levi was given this very sad prediction about his tribe, because they repented, God could change and give them a different future. And he gave them this high honor of carrying the things of the sanctuary. 1 Testimony 6:52, the Lord designated a special family of the tribe of Levi to bear the ark, and others of the Levites were specially appointed of God to bear the tabernacle and all its furniture, and to perform the work of setting up and taking down the tabernacle. So these were like the deacons of the church. You know, I wonder how many deacons recognize the sacredness of taking care of the church. And in what condition is the church kept in? Not always the best. But it's a very high privilege to be a deacon and to have responsibility for the church, as well as other offices too. The last one we'll read tonight, Patriarchs and Prophets 375. To the Levites was committed the charge of the tabernacle and all that pertained thereto, both in the camp and on the journey. When the camp set forward, they were to strike the sacred tent, which means take it down. When a halting place was reached, they were to set it up. Now here's an interesting thing. No person of another tribe was allowed to come near on pain of death. So somebody else couldn't drift over there and say, oh, let me help you pack up the sanctuary. No, God gave this special duty to them, and no one else was to do it. Even they would die if they tried to do it. The Levites were separated into 3 divisions. The descendants of the 3 sons of Levi, and each was assigned its special position and work. Notice God's particular. Always. He gives details, and he expects it to be done exactly like he said. In front of the tabernacle and nearest to it were the tents of Moses and Aaron. On the south were the Kohathites, whose duty it was to care for the ark and the other furniture. On the north, Merarites, who were placed in charge of the pillars, sockets, boards, and so forth. In the rear, the Gershonites, to whom the care of the curtains and hangings was committed. And the Gershonites couldn't say, well, we're going to go over and help the Kohathites. No, they were to be faithful with what God assigned them, and each one was to do that. God was so particular in every single detail. He hasn't changed. He means everything he said. There's only one thing that he said we don't have to do anymore, and that is to have the sanctuary on earth. We don't need to have that, because now we're to look at the heavenly one. But everything else that he said is still to be followed today in exact detail. Well, may God help us to realize the high privilege we have to be where God is on Sabbath, and to develop the reverence that the angels have for the law of God, and the humility that we'll be willing to do what God says, exactly what He says, and ask Him to help us to be able to do it.